Ready to escape into a world of enchanting pixels? What is up, my peeps? And today we're going to be continuing Speedrun. So let's go, if I can get the page open. The 128-bit years. The brief flight of the Sega Dreamcast. It was obvious to video game publishers and their consumers alike that Sega Saturn was not going to recover the ground it had lost to Sony's PlayStation. Moderate sales in Japan were insufficient to offset a dismal performance in the West, and the Saturn's successor was fast-tracked into production. The idea was to beat both Sony and Nintendo's next machines to market, establishing a lead over Sega's better-resourced rivals than their next-generation consoles would not be so easily be able to catch up. The Dreamcast system was designed to remedy the Saturn's failings. While the 32-bit console had been conservatively designed around 2D graphics, the new system looked forward to a new era of connectivity. It featured a modem for online play and also a mini-console built into each memory card. The first Dreamcast development kits became available around the time of Sonic Jam's completion, and Sonic Team migrated its work-in-progress 3D concepts to the new system. The team had grown substantially since its early incarnations at the Sega Technical Institute. Sufficient staff were now employed to continue the work while simultaneously advertising traveling tales on Sonic Art and completing their final Saturn title, Burning Rangers. Sonic Adventure was released in December 1998, about a month after the Dreamcast's Japanese launch. Experiments and concept demos had continued for a considerable period of time, with Naka and his closest colleagues heading a hand-picked team. Once satisfied with their approach, they began development proper for a period of 10 months, engaging approximately 60 Sega employees. Sonic Adventure 1 was the longest-waited 3D flagship for the character, but also marked the last time that his three original creators would work with him, as Nato Oshima left Sega to start his own company on completion of the title. Whoops, there we go. The game constituted a complete version of the handling prototype seen in Sonic Jam, with the addition of the homing attack that makes the hedgehogs jump on the enemy's attack work in 3D. Structurally, the title was an evolution of the Mega Drive installments, with the familiar zones now dubbed action stages and ascended from a network of combat-free areas which Sonic could explore at leisure. The most remarkable aspect of the game was the size of the levels, a clear contrast to any title seen on 32-bit hardware. During an interview shortly before the launch of the game, Naka commented that the scale of the maps he had to create was the greatest problem in the title's developments. The Sonic World prototype had coped reasonably well with an environment comparable to one of Mario 64's levels, but its star had noticeably lacked speed. This demonstrated the need for the vast environments that Sonic Adventure 1 introduced. It was this factor which caused the inclusion of other playable characters, so players would notice the detail had been worked into areas which they would have otherwise just sped past. Sonic Adventure 1 split its story between 6 heroes. Each had their own perspective on events, as they were caught up in Robotnik's bid to revive the ancient water elemental Chaos and use him to conquer the world. The characters' adventures crossed over at several points, with the option to start each figure's story being unlocked after the player had met that hero in the game. A degree of thought had gone into this approach, with cutscenes dialogue experienced by more than one character varying fractionally, as if each hero viewed it from a different perspective. This eases repetition and gives the impression that each protagonist remembers the events slightly differently. For most of the supporting cast, Sonic's action stages are slightly repurposed. Only Amy and a robot with a conscience E102 Gamma have unique areas added to the environments. Wait, what? Wait, is it Gamma? Yeah, Gamma. Gamma? Yeah, it is Gamma, I think. Have unique areas added to the environment. Have unique areas added to the environment, suiting their styles of platforming. Knuckles undertakes a semi-random treasure hunt, using his exploration abilities to navigate more open areas. The newcomer Big the Cat has a fishing-based minigame, while Tails drew the short straw. Flying was too challenging a mechanic for Sonic Team to fully incorporate, so the Fox is limited to racing his hero through short sections of Sonic's levels. Completing all the character stories unlocks the final section, in which control of Sonic is resumed for the climax. This approach to storytelling became typical for Sonic games over the next few years, infuriating those who only wish to play as the Hedgehog. If you regard the other characters' take on the action stages as bonus content though, it's hard to begrudge the developers' wish to show off the environments they had created. One of Nato Oshima's final tasks before his departure from Sonic Team was to redesign his creation, originally intended to be only viewed from the side, to suit a 3D model. The artist chose to make the Hedgehog even more stylized, streamlining his figure. The innocent look of the 1991 design was replaced by a vicious Nike-inspired grin, and the addition of green pupils to the character's eyes reflected a general increase in detail. This approach was then rolled out across the remainder of the returning characters, although more significant changes were made to Amy and Dr. Robotnik. The female Hedgehog was completely redesigned, looking significantly older and given a simplified red dress in place of her over-complex Sonic CD outfit. Oshima's work on the Mad Scientist finally banished the memory of the Adventures of Sonic design. The character was given an ornamented red coat with a slight military air, as well as goggles to emphasize his engineering experience. Oh, so that would explain why Robotnik looks like he belongs in the military, sort of, or is inspired by the military. Cool. Anyway. With minor tweaks, these versions of the characters would persist largely unaltered for the next 15 years. The summer 1998 Japanese teaser campaign for the game's announcements emphasized the redesigns, using the quasi-silhouette image of the Hedgehog's new eyes and sharper teeth against a black background. The developers sought to give a distinct flavor to the game, drawing much inspiration from a fact-finding trip to South America. The results of this were clearly reflected in the design of Mystic Ruins hub area and the Lost World penultimate action stage. While other levels supplied more realistic takes on standard Sonic tropes, since then, many big-budget entries in the series have used a real-world-inspired location as their signature setting, and a base from which to expand out on the more fantastical realms as seen on the Mega Drive. True. Ooh, I wonder what real-life location Sonic Frontiers is based on. Anyway, this approach fits very well with the emphasis of the series having always placed on the level's aesthetic design quality as a means of capturing potential players' attention. Sonic Adventure 1 started a trend towards Sonic games as a holiday-like experience for their players, and this concept would continue through the core series for the next 10 years. Even the parts of Sonic Adventure 1 outside of the Mayan setting hint at reality, with the crash barriers at the sides of Speed Highway state action. Oh my goodness. With the crash barriers at the side of the Speed Highway action stage, a familiar sight to anyone with experience of Tokyo's road network. Okay, so Speed Highway does have some Japanese influence, which would make sense. It is a Sonic level, but okay. That does make sense. Anyway, the title established another template through the approach taken to publishing its soundtrack, which was the first to emerge with Joan Sedone in the role of sound director. A single CD containing the game's vocal songs formed the initial release, being followed by a couple of months later by a 2-CD set including all the other tracks on the title. The former was distinctly a mixed bag due to the tracks themselves. The main theme, Open Your Heart, has a nostalgic appeal for those who played the game at the time of its release, but it's actually one of the weaker compositions from June Sedone's Crush 40 band. Really? It's considered a weaker composition? I thought it wasn't. Okay then. The rest of the vocal tracks are variable. Tails' theme stands up quite well, and has been revisited in instrumental format by many subsequent Sonic games. While Big the Cats did much to sync the now forgotten character, there's no such ambulance, I cannot pronounce that word, around the full soundtrack release Digilogic Conversation, which is superb throughout. Sedone handled the bulk of composing duties, and the score established him as the definitive Sonic musician. Despite his preference for rock, he varies his approach where necessary, and it's impossible to imagine the game without his work. The title's development was slightly truncated in order to release the game within a month of the Dreamcast's Japanese launch, and Sonic Team chose to continue work in the 7 months available for the console's Western release. Yuji Naka was keen for his Sonic Team division to be a true software developer, responsible for a wide array of titles instead of merely a Sonic factory. For this reason, Sonic Adventure 1's director, Tadashi Iizuka, I think I'm saying that right, relocated a small number of programmers to San Francisco, where he continued polishing the code with Naka advising from afar. Despite the marketing hype behind the Western release, which was brought to Japan under the name of Sonic Adventure International. Really? That's what it's called? Okay, then. Interesting. Differences were minimal, save for an English language dub for the dialogue. Unfortunately, the inclusion of English speech wasn't really worth the wait. Sonic Team had rightly regarded having its creation talking in-game as a huge step for the character, and expended considerable energy in auditioning the Japanese cast. This effort paid off, and in some cases the voice artists in question have been retained ever since. Sega of America, in contrast, took a more haphazard approach. The actors were given single lines to perform with no context whatsoever. Instead of complete scripts, this led to some predictably poor work with Sonic's deadpan, Tails, look out, you're going to crash, A few minutes into the game, passing quickly into legend. Luckily, this mistake was learned from, with subsequent titles seeing improvements in performance due to the provision of full scripts. The English voice cast proved a less permanent fixture than the Japanese counterparts. However, with replacements of artists a common event. Yuji Naka was furious on learning that for 2000's Sonic Shuffle spin-off, Ryan Drummond had been engaged to play both Sonic and Knuckles, following the withdrawal of the latter's established actor. In fairness to Sega of American, many vocal artists have a huge range, but having the two stories' highest-profile heroes be played by the same actor did seem an excessively economical approach, and Drummond's abilities to restore to voicing Sonic only. Really? Drummond was going to voice Knuckles, too? Interesting. One result of Sonic Team's newfound creative control over the franchise was the resolution of the long-running Eggman-Robotnik disparity. Recognizing that the Robotnik name had gained traction in the West, and Sonic Team tried to reconcile the situation in Sonic Adventure 1, they made Robotnik the character's real moniker, with Eggman Sonic's insulting nickname. This proved unsustainable, however, and shortly afterwards, Sega bit the bullet and adopted the Eggman name in all territories. Okay, so this is where the Eggman name comes from. Most fans accepted the issue with a shrug of the shoulders, and Sega Europe have intermittently added aka Dr. Robotnik to the brief biology of the character in the game's manuals. The best part is that some people can still call him Robotnik. Anyway, at the beginning of 2000, there were only 2 surviving outliers from the plethora of rival conceptions of the Hedgehog. Now firmly overshadowed by Sonic Team's vision, Archie's comic book continuation of the Sat.IM version was still in publication, but now included designs based on the Sonic Adventure character models. The other was a third and final TV series from French firm Indique, a successor to the Adventures of Sonic and Sat.IM. Adventures of Sonic and Sonic Sat.IM. Commissioned by Sega's Western division to help publicize Sonic Adventure, Sonic Underground is easily the weaker of Deek's outputs, and was cancelled before the end of its first season. Essentially, Sonic Underground took the basic concept of Sat.IM, with Sonic the leader of a rebellion against a ruling power, and threw it at many additional concepts in the hope that some might stick. The show's version of Sonic is a deposed prince, who serves as a lead singer in a band with his 2 siblings, one of whom is predictably named Manic. Deke veteran Jaleel White once again proved the Hedgehog's voice, although entertainingly a different performer took over for sections in which he was required to sing. That's a common thing with voice acting. Sometimes a character's normal voice is replaced for someone else's singing voice. Anyway, Sonic Adventure proved to be the Dreamcast's highest-selling title, but Sega once again found itself outflanked by Sony. The announcement of the PS2 console promised a level of performance far beyond the capabilities of any other system and sent shockwaves through the industry. Sega quickly began to harmonize support from third-party software developers. eager to jump on the bandwagon of Sony's new venture. The reality of the PlayStation 2 was considerably less impressive than the promises made. But consumer confidence in Sega slumped, and the company found itself fighting a rearguard action. Despite Sonic Team's control in the franchise remained tight, and there was no new sea of spin-offs to trade on the success of Sonic Adventure 1, the only new home title in 2 years of follow-up was the curious Dreamcast venture Sonic Shuffle. This consulted a thinly disguised ripoff of the Mario Party virtual board games, with the Sonic Adventure character models pressed back into service. Despite some surprisingly intricate rules, the game was even duller than its inspiration, and it deservedly sank without trace. There had been no successor to the long-discontinued Game Gear, and the struggles of the Dreamcast led Sega to look on its competitors' handheld machines as a potential source of revenue. The first foray into third-party development bloomed in 1999 with the first release of a bespoke title on a non-Sega piece of hardware. Sonic Pocket Adventure was available exclusively for SNK's Neo Geo Pocket Color, a niche player in its native Japan, with an even smaller amount of sales in the West. It's a charming little game. Although minimal original content was created, level concepts and music are drawn entirely from Sonic 2 and Sonic 3 on the Mega Drive/Genesis. Despite proudly displaying Sonic Team branding, the game was actually developed by DIMS, a Japanese collective that seeks deliberately a low profile, working mainly in others' properties. The fact that the company is owned by a number of other Japanese software houses, including Sega, may explain this. SNK's handheld is thought of as a augmented 8-bit system, and Sonic Pocket Adventure is a hybrid of the early Game Gear Sonics and their big brothers. Interestingly, the swipes from the Mega Drive's art direction sit side by side with the post-Sonic Adventure features, such as the 1998 redesign of the Hedgehog. DIMS have been possible for the majority of handheld Sonic titles ever since. With Sonic Team proper almost entirely engrossed in the development of the Dreamcast role-playing game Phantasy Star Online, Yuji Naka decided to form a subsidiary to handle development of the main Sonic series. After years at the forefront of Sonic Team's design, Takashi Iizuka, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, was placed in charge of the new organization formed from the San Francisco group that completed the Western version of Sonic Adventure 1. Iizuka's outfit was given the unofficial moniker of Sonic Team USA, although its games were only ever released under the more general Sonic Team branding. Mindful of the leap in his creation's popularity that accompanied the US-developed Sonic 2, Naka felt that adopting a more American artistic direction would again benefit Sonic's global standing in response to this directive. The team decided to set its sequel to Sonic Adventure in San Francisco, The team decided to set its sequel to Sonic Adventure 1 in San Francisco with a much more vivid style of energy and imagery. As with its predecessor, Sonic Adventure 2, or SA2 for short, focused on a new weapon that Dr. Eggman, the Robotnik, had uncovered and was seeking to use against the world. Rather than the semi-mystical chaos, the centerpiece of the plot was Shadow the Hedgehog, an artificial life form created by the Eggman's grandfather, claiming to be bound by Eggman's wishes. The Black Hedgehog instructed him to gather the Chaos Emeralds of the abandoned Ark space station, which had been its birthplace. As the game progresses, however, it emerges that Shadow is following the orders of his late creator, who went mad and decided to destroy the world in the final battle. In the final battle, all characters team up in the style favored by Nintendo to counter the external threat of the Ark's computer and the Shadow prototype it unleashes. Significantly, Shadow was not conceived as a reoccurring character, being killed off at close of the game. The other debuting figure was Rouge the Bat, a jewel thief whose abilities mimicked Knuckles. This was required by the game's duality design concept. The main theme of the title was a split between the forces of good and evil, with both sides having playable campaigns giving their own perspectives on the story. The hero side was filled by the predictable trio of Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles, with a cutscene-only Amy tagging along for the ride. The Dark Crew consisted of Shadow, Eggman, and Rouge. The Knuckles/Rouge stages were custom-designed treasure hunting areas and stand up superbly today thanks to their non-linear construction, as well as some outstanding design work in the case of Pumpkin Hill. The Eggman Tails levels reprise E012's E102 Gamma's shooting sections from the first Sonic Adventure, with the Fox aboard a transforming biplane mech walker. The Tornado 2. Anyway, for the most part, these are the game's weakest element, with the concept only making good on its potential in Eggman's final level. That stage, Cosmic Wall, is distinguished by a genuine feeling of carnage as the scientist blasts his way through Ark's defenses, aided by some inspired background music. Sonic Adventure 2 also makes a surprisingly large contribution to fleshing out the game's world. A structure of government is shown to be based around a president, who has made a number of appearances in the series, and the Guardian Units of Nations, GUN, is introduced. This military organization functions as a peacekeeping force in Sonic's world, keeping the conventional response of society to the threat posed by Eggman and the like. Given that half the game is played from the perspective of the villains, and the initial arc of the hero story has Sonic being pursued for Shadow's crimes, Gun's assault droids are the standard enemy faced throughout the title. The main gameplay addition to Sonic's action stages is grinding along rails and metal beams in the style of skateboarders, highlighted through a tie-in promotion with the now discontinued footwear brand Soap Shoes, which the Hedgehog duly sported throughout the game. The grinding model in SA2 is slightly more complex than in subsequent titles, with momentum and the direction in which Sonic is leaning having an impact on his speed and progress. This gameplay element was mainly introduced to give variety to Sonic's progression. Instead of having him continually running down narrow pathways, it's been a mixed blessing for the series, providing an alternative means of movement for action stages, but also giving a lazy way for developers to increase the difficulty by simply filling an area with split-second girder-to-girder jumps. What do they mean by that? Bridge girders? Anyway. TL was forced to develop the game in the face of Sega's growing financial difficulties, and so cannot call upon the formidable level of resources marshaled for Sonic Adventure 1. The reduced team was not able to create bespoke and tailored environments to the same degree as the previous title, resulting in a reuse of a toolbox of elements and assets to build each stage. There are fewer open vistas compared to Sonic Adventure to allow smoother animation, and it can seem at times as if the Hedgehog is moving through a confined trench rather than an open world. The brasher feel is immediately obvious in both the vividly sun-drenched stages and June Sedoon's more forthright soundtrack. To underline the fact that the game is a direct sequel, Sedoon remixed and re-recorded returning characters' vocal songs, as well as Sonic Adventure 1's various power-up jingles. The remainder of the soundtrack was entirely new, with Fumi Kumatani, I think so you pronounce that, amongst others, supporting the lead composer. And there was an attempt to give a distinct musical style to each character stages. SA2 released on the character's 10th birthday, the 23rd of June 2001. A limited edition version was sold in Europe exclusively through Sega's website, including a brief history booklet and a commemorative coin and a music CD. This was a slightly cut-down version of the Japanese birthday pack, which also included an oversized box. A more substantial acknowledgement of the anniversary, was found on the game disc itself. Obtaining 100% completion score on the title would unlock a polygonal reproduction of Sonic 1's Green Hill Zone, carefully crafted in the SA2 engine. Another nod to the past saw a return by the two-player split-screen competition mode last seen in Sonic 3. While this mode is known to be the favorite of Yuji Naka, it probably doesn't justify this implication imposed on the action stages included, which had to be tailored so the Dreamcast could render each twice. Although SA2's more linear ethos made it fall slightly short of the original game's high standards, it was still a high-quality effort. Today it serves as the Dreamcast obligatory, being released 4 months after Sega announced that its last home console would be discontinued. The video game hardware business requires companies... Wait, hold on. The video game... I lost my spot. Okay, there we go. The video game hardware business requires... Hold on, give me 1 second. Okay, where was I? The video game hardware business requires companies to shoulder considerable costs as they develop their machines and spend in advertising to build up a user base, then hope to recoup their outlay through game sales and license fees in the later years of the machine's life. With resources diminished by the truncated life of the Saturn, Sega could not sustain the short-term losses in supporting the early years of the Dreamcast's life, and so announced its withdrawal from the hardware market in March of 2001. After a decade-long stint as Sega's company mascot, Sonic had outlived the consoles he was created to promote. A extra life. In theory, Sonic's transition from the console manufacturer to a third-party developer for other systems should have been benefit to the Sonic franchise. The company was assiduously courted by the former rivals who had run it into the ground, and its studios had been freed from the schedule constraints of supporting a specific hardware platform. The reality was more muted. Sega was precariously close to bankruptcy, and the lavish project budgets which had marked the Dreamcast era were now only a memory. Just as importantly, the programmers can no longer count on receiving the latest development tools and debug units. Instead of favoritism from their hardware development colleagues, Sega software teams joined the long queue of firms at the doors of Sony, Nintendo, and even Microsoft, whose Xbox console had just entered the fray. Sonic had a clear creative direction and a strong controlling hand from Sonic Team, but the next 2 years of his life would be a struggle to make good on that vision due to financial constraints. The first priority for Sega was to get money coming in through the door, and so SA2 was hastily re-released for Nintendo's new GameCube system, being called, I believe, SA2 Battle. Despite a mere 6 months having passed since the well-received Dreamcast version, the title received a bafflingly rocky critical response. It still managed to sell 1.5 million copies at retail, an achievement given the GameCube's limited user base. An enhanced port of the original Sonic Adventure was put into development for the Nintendo console and PC. After completing Sonic Pocket Adventure, DIMS were commissioned almost immediately to develop Sonic Advance for Nintendo's Nintendo GBA system. This portable title bore the greatest resemblance to the first 16-bit Sonic title, with the titular Hedgehog, Tails, Knuckles, or Amy having to make their way through six stages in the established 2D style, taking possession of the Chaos Emeralds from a skyboarding special stage offered access to a final area. Bland level design and uninspired concepts gave her early warning that DIMP's output would not hold the interest of those who experienced their original 2D games. Sonic Advance was released in late 2001. A port to ill-fated phone handheld console hybrid, the Nokia N-Gage, followed a couple of years later, in accordance with Sega's apparent preference for systems with limited commercial prospects. The revenue from the limited Nintendo ventures justified recommissioning Sonic Team USA for the next title in the series, Sonic Heroes. Although a much reduced budget was available, with several years having elapsed since Sonic Jam, another retro pack was quickly released to consolidate the Sega's preference on the GameCube, containing the original 4 Mega Drive games. In contrast to the situation on home systems, Sega's experience with working with SNK left it fully adequated with a third-party role on mobile platforms, and DIMS was soon instructed to promote a sequel to Sonic Advance using the same engine. Minor alterations were made to the gameplay to incorporate elements from SA2, such as Sonic's use of stunt pads to launch himself into the air, and an adjustment on the way the spin attack operated. For the most part, however, the 2002 title was essentially more of the same, with a similar lack of inspiration in level design. The game was most notable for introducing a new character in the form of Cream the Rabbit, a 6-year-old girl who took Amy's slot in the roster of playable characters. Cream is unique for 2 reasons. Firstly, she has easily the worst name in the entire Sonic canon, sounding like an instruction you receive when following a Henston Blumenthal recipe. Secondly, she's the only character to be shown having a blood relation, with her prime motivation in the game being to rescue her mother, Vanilla. That doesn't sound particular striking, but given Sonic Team's reluctance to expound on its hero's origins, it's the only indication that Sonic characters aren't simply found under gooseberry bushes. Sonic Advance 2, again, sold like hotcakes, and a third effort would eventually appear in 2004, with a character-swapping gimmick inspired by Sonic Heroes' team-up concept. This was joined on the Nintendo handheld by Sonic Battle, a frankly bizarre isometric beat-em-up, as well as Sonic Pinball Party. Unlike Sonic Spinball, there was no plot attached to this game, which simply included a pinball table themed around the Sonic series in its roster. Interest was further muted by the fact that it recycled art and sprites from Dimp's GBA titles. Although no fully fledged game was released in 2003, it remains an important year for the character due to the launch of Sonic X, a Japanese children cartoon series, aka anime, masterminded by Sonic Team. The show's premise saw Sonic characters trapped on Earth. Various misadventures then ensue as they try to adhere to their traditional modus operandi in a more real-world setting. Hint, hint, Station Square. Anyway, Sonic X may have been the fourth in a procession of TV incarnations of the character, but it's easily the best, remaining true to the concepts of the game while creating its own unique setting. Sega's involvement in the venture was extensive, and a soundtrack created by Wavemaster Sound Studio and Yuji Naka undertaking promotional duties for the project. He explained to fans that the series did not follow the same continuity of the games, taking place in a different dimension. The highest profile to the game's characters is Chris Thorndike, a lonely rich kid who saves Sonic from drowning at the end of the opening episode. His house comes to be used as base of operations by the forces of good, although the boy's parents make fleeting appearances when the plot requires. Chris' eccentric inventor grandfather and family samurai-obsessed butler take more significant roles. It's an utterly charming little show, with perfect characterization throughout. Although initially commissioned for 13 episodes, approval was likely given for the full run of 26, allowing a long-running plotline regarding Eggman's accumulation of the Chaos Emeralds to play out. Although the program isn't high drama, there is a trace of real emotion in the finale, when Sonic and Chris both willing to sacrifice themselves to save the other. The commercial success of Sonic X was tremendous, with a far greater volume of merchandise shifted than any other single iteration of the character has given rise after initially airing on Japan's TV Tokyo. A Western dub was broadcast in the US on Fox, and then distributed through many other countries. A second run of 26 episodes was ordered, but the script team had found that its originally planned story arc was complete, and they had few places left to take the show. The problem was partially resolved by using most of Season 2 to present adaptations of the two Sonic Adventure games, although they suffered from the need to shoehorn Chris into the existing plots. There's an upswing in quality for the final 10 episodes, which feature original storylines. Events are further enlivened by a particularly amusing fourth-wall-breaking debut for Chaotix, who have missed out on the action so far and have to catch up on events by viewing the DVD releases. The Season 2 finale is effectively a reprise of the end of Season 1. In one respect, the second series, or season, of Sonic X performed an invaluable service to the character, proving a sustained examination of his life philosophy. In the final arc of the series, the people of the world are beginning to mimic Sonic's approach, not bothering to attend work and spending the day lazing around until something catches their attention. It's eventually revealed that the problem is due to Super Sonic having merged two dimensions together at the close of the final series. But the spotlight it throws on the character it's illuminating confirms that the portrayal of the character throughout the show has been no accident. Unlike Tails, who made a home for himself in the grandfather's workshop, Sonic was never sought a room in Chris's house, being content to sleep outside, and apparently lacking any personal possessions. The supreme reductance to be tied down is consistent with the games and goes a long way in explaining why titles have seldom Sonic return to the location of a previous adventure. Sonic is perpetually on holiday, always moving on and finding new places to explore. He's indulgent, rather than being hedonistic, being perfectly willing to doze the afternoon away rather than engaging in activity that doesn't interest him. He'll pursue a goal with tendency, but it remains unattached from life, appreciating the moment with little forward planning. His friends serve as the only link to the rest of the world. Tellingly, Sonic is never shown to acquire a house or even a permanent residence in any of the games, in contrast to his supporting cast. At the start of the story, his wandering always brings him to somewhere new, and he reacts to what he meets there. This disillusion to the character may go some way to explaining why he's proved so resilient to taking root in Japanese culture. He's the antithesis of his home nation's worth ethic and strong social identity, and the large part of the Sonic X message is that his actions are unsustainable in large sections of the population. The way Sonic relates to human perspective on life and the perpetual lack of attachment to others will later be a key theme in the finale adventure Yuji Naka supervised for his creation. For some regions, the definitive conclusion of Sonic X came at the end of Season 2. With Sonic and his friends returned to their home planet outside of Japan, however, there was still considerable network demand for the show, and so a further Season 3 was produced. This had stronger fantasy and sci-fi elements, being set on Sonic's unnamed homeworld, to which the grown-up Chris has constructed a portal. Unusually, this final run of episodes never received a Japanese broadcast, despite a full dub of that series being created in that country's language. American enthusiasm for the series was also sufficient to sustain over 25 issues of a dedicated comic book from Archie, as well as bucket loads of action figures, cuddly toys, and other merchandise. One unfortunate consequence of Sonic X was the working of the game's English voice cast. English vocal cast, my bad. When Sonic X came to the West in 2004, localization firm 4Kids declined to follow the example of the Japanese original series and hire actors who would voice Sonic and Company in game instead. It preferred to use its own performers. This drew some disquiet from the Sonic fan community. Despite poor work in the first Sonic adventure, Ryan Sonic Drummond, in particular, had embraced the game's followers, being more than happy to give interviews to fan websites. What followed added insult to injury, with Sega of America declining to use the 4Kids platformers declined to use the 4Kids and performers in all games that followed. This cost-saving measure understandably led some fans to take further umbrage against Sega of America. Although the quality of performances remained largely unchanged, the 4Kids actor Jason Griffith's Sonic sounded a little younger than Drummond's. But that's the only difference. Sonic Heroes, the next major home console game, would be Drummond's final performance as the character. The second title from Sonic Team USA, had its Western release in early 2004, with considerable fanfare made of its status as the first multi-format Sonic game. The title was simultaneously launched on the PS2, GameCube, and Xbox. Or rather, original Xbox. I can't say SA2 anymore because Sonic Advance 2 exists. After Sonic Adventure 2, Takashi... Oh my goodness, I'm going to say TL again. TL and his fellow developers appear to have set their sights lower, although the constantly tightening budgetary restraints will have played a part. While Sonic Adventure 1 was the work of a 60-strong team, Sonic... Is it Heroes? Yes, Heroes. Heroes was produced by less than a third of that total. The game was conceived a nostalgic look to the past of the series, with a return to familiar checkerboard walls art direction. This bid to a Sony console audience who had not touched a Sonic title since his salad days on the Mega Drive, proved successful. Sonic Heroes passes the new level concepts test outlined in Chapter 5, thanks to the giant metropolis's pop art futurism and the haunted Mystic Mansion. But the game is squarely conservative. There's minimal emphasis on story and a greater attention paid to fixing legacy gameplay problems. The main innovation is allowing the character and the player to control a team of 3 characters at once, with the primary character switched at will to allow the use of differing abilities. These powers were modeled after the trademark abilities of the lead team, with Sonic giving access to high-speed platforming, Tails having limited flight abilities, and Knuckles offering a wide range of combat options to fight the more heavily armed bad guys Eggman has deployed. Other teams have to fight their way through tweaked variants of the stages for Sonic's squad. Team Dark poses the hardest challenge, led by an amnesic Shadow. In an early cutscene, the Black Hedgehog is discovered to be held in suspended animation in one of Eggman's bases. He is joined by Rouge and a psychotic malfunctioning robot, E102 and E123 Omega, clearly influenced by SA1's E102 Gamma. His presence means that 2/3 of Team Dark have received semi-plausible resurrections. The remainder of the action is shared between Team Rose, Amy, Cream, and Big, and revived and redesigned Chaotix, Espo, Charmy, and Vector, who are now portrayed as a group of private detectives. There's a distinctly retro tone with events, with Earth-like cities and civilizations of the previous 2 core games downplayed in favor of a fantasy setting, which Eggman is the only human seen. The story has apparently ordinary offensive by the scientists revealed to be nothing of the sort, with the real Eggman held prisoner and impersonated by his upgraded Metal Sonic. Wow, so Metal Sonic did rebel in that game. Hold on, I'm gonna check something. Nah, I think I'm gonna call it here. Alright, so don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Talk to y'all later.